Great to have your company on Sky News Across Australia. Now, there have been calls for some time from both outside and inside the government for Australia to have a fuel security plan. As we've learnt from the COVID pandemic, things can take a turn for the worse at any time. So today the Morrison government outlined its plan to ensure that Australia is prepared when it comes to fuel supplies. Earlier today, the Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor outlined the government's policy to shore up our fuel stocks. I caught up with Minister Taylor earlier to discuss the plan. Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor, thank you for joining us tonight on Sky News Across Australia. Can you take us through today's announcement on the fuel security plan? It's obviously a big one and one that many politicians are saying is long overdue.
Yeah, Peter, look, it's a package which is very focused on making sure consumers get what they need with liquid fuels. That's petrol, diesel, as well as, of course, aviation gas used by aeroplanes, making sure that we put downward pressure on prices and avoid price spikes, and there's a reliable supply. It's there when you need it, and critically this is about controlling our own destiny as a country in the worst possible scenarios, but it's also about creating jobs, because we know liquid fuels are really critical to having jobs in agriculture and mining and tradies and other sectors. Now, there's three parts to the package. The first part is a minimum mandatory stock holding on industry, so they have to hold enough stock so that we, in a worst possible situation, still have enough fuel to keep the economy going, and there's a particular focus here on diesel. Secondly, to meet those stock holdings, there'll need to be new storages built in Australia, and we're committing $200 million of federal government funding to support the construction of those additional storages, whether it be in ports or near existing refineries, or indeed out near customers where there's a lot of fuel used. The third part is a payment to the refineries of $0.01 a litre to keep them sustainable and to recognise the role they play in fuel security. Our refineries are very important because they can process our local crude oil coming out of Bass Strait and elsewhere, and ensure, again, in a worst case scenario, that our essential services can keep going despite the fact that we may not have imports. So they're critical in the system, and of course that $0.01 a litre production payment is recognising the critical role they're playing. All in all, this will ensure we have the fuel security we need as a country through thick and thin.
Now, of course, we've had Senator Jim Molan on the show before, and he stressed the importance of this particular program. There's also some strategic defence components to this, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the worst case scenarios may well be a strategic defence issue, you know, they're the scenarios we can be concerned about. But we have faced over the last 40 years much lesser disruptions, but still important. We often see disruptions in the Middle East, which means fuel's not getting to Australia as fast as we would like it to, or international markets are affected. And we've got to deal with not just the really big disruptions, but also those smaller ones. And your older viewers will remember those days in the 70s and 80s where we had to alternate days between odd-numbered cars versus even-numbered cars. So we have had to deal with this in the past. We've managed it pretty well, but we're also seeing less and less crude oil being produced in Australia, and we've seen a reduction in our refining capacity. So now is the time to step in, make sure we shore this up, that our farmers, our tradies, our commuters, our manufacturers have those liquid fuels they really need.
Minister, a lot of speculation about the energy mix going forward. Obviously, we've got the Paris Agreement that we're adhering to. Where do you see hydrogen in this particular narrative?
Well, the whole point about energy is it's got to be a balance, Peter, and this is the key. You know, coal has an important role to play, gas has an important role to play, renewables have a role to play, more and more people putting solar on their roofs, but hydrogen is a source of energy which has enormous potential into the future as well. Now, that may be for electricity, but more likely actually as an industrial feedstock. So people may not realise this, but a large part of the fertiliser used by farmers is now produced from hydrogen. So it's not a new industry. When farmers put fertiliser on their crops to increase production, typically that will have been produced from gas turned into hydrogen. So it's an existing industry, but it's one we think we can expand a great deal. It can be produced from gas, but it can also be produced from renewables. And there's many countries in Asia who would like to use it as a feedstock for industry and for electricity. So great potential. We in Australia, because we have gas, because we have lots of renewables, are well positioned to get into that market. It's why we're investing a significant amount as a government in the research and development necessary to get the industry up and running.
Now, coronavirus has had a massive impact on the economy, on the fiscal stability in this country. And whenever politicians do their surveys of constituents, the number one issue is generally cost of living. And as part of cost of living, energy supply and, of course, electricity prices are right at the top, Minister. What's your government doing to try and keep a lid on energy prices right now?
Well, we've done an enormous amount. I mean, we've put legislation through the Parliament, which means that companies can't manipulate the market. We've put price caps in place over recent times, but we're also seeing results. It's true, not everyone has seen the reductions they would like, although we're seeing very significant reductions in retail prices now. We had 4 consecutive quarters last year of retail price reductions, which is the first time in history. We've got wholesale prices, which are the prices paid particularly by industry, now at the lowest levels they've been at for many, many years, and that's all good news. Now, critical to ensuring, as we look forward, that we hold prices down and drive down retail prices, we need to see more capacity going into the market, and that's particularly baseload and dispatchable capacity. Gas has an important role to play in that, and that extra supply will continue to put downward pressure on prices, Peter. That is absolutely crucial, and it will continue to be a big focus from the government.
Angus, just finally, look, we know that there's been a lot of speculation around border closures, about border restrictions. You know, there are many, many businesses, small businesses, tourism operators who are doing it particularly tough at the moment. The Prime Minister, Greg Hunt, Josh Frydenberg have all come out and said that they'd like to see an easing on the restrictions on borders, particularly among, you know, that Queensland, New South Wales border and sort of SA and WA and so forth. What's your thoughts? As a senior cabinet minister, where do you stand on all this?
Well, you've got to remember that the Federation was formed with the objective of not having borders. In fact, there's a clause in the Constitution that's designed to make sure we don't have internal borders. Now, you know, it should be used as an absolute last resort by premiers, and we're seeing some of the implications of arbitrary decisions on borders by premiers. It can be quite tragic. So, you know, our position from the start has been we need Australians to be able to move around the country. Obviously, health is enormously important in all of this, but New South Wales has shown us how we can have a relatively open economy and still get very, very good health outcomes. We need other states to take note of what New South Wales is doing. I think it's one of the world leaders in terms of its ability to track and trace and test and those things which are crucial to having an open economy. But, you know, in my electorate, we're seeing now economy is getting back towards normal, and that's good news, and we're seeing that all over New South Wales. We'd like to see it everywhere.
Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor, thanks for joining us on Sky News Across Australia.
Thanks for having me, Peter.